Hello, friends, this is the second part of the video. Enjoy the video. After the confrontation, things at home became unbearable. Sarah acted like I was the problem, giving me the cold shoulder while playing the perfect mother in front of the kids. The tension was so thick, it was hard to breathe. But I wasn't going to let her gaslight me. I needed solid proof of her affair, not just for my own sanity but because I wanted to protect myself when everything inevitably fell apart. I reached out to a friend from work, Tom, who had a background in IT. I explained my situation, and he reluctantly agreed to help. "You're sure about this?" he asked as he handed me a small device. "I need to know the truth," I said, my jaw set. The device was a GPS tracker. I placed it under Sarah's car one night while she was sleeping. If she was meeting Mark or anyone else, I'd know exactly where. The next few days were excruciating. I went through the motions at work and at home, pretending everything was fine while checking the tracker on my phone whenever I could. And then it happened. On a Friday afternoon, while I was supposed to be at work, the tracker showed her car parked at a motel on the outskirts of town. My stomach dropped. I called Tom. "I need you to cover for me," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell the boss I had to leave early for a family emergency." He didn't ask questions, just agreed. I drove to the motel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I arrived, I parked a few spots away from Sarah's car and sat there, trying to steady my breathing. After what felt like an eternity, I saw them. Sarah and Mark came out of one of the rooms, laughing and holding hands. They didn't even try to hide it. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The video wasn't perfect, I was too far away for clear audio, but it was enough to show them together, their bodies close, their smiles too intimate for just friends. I stayed in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When they finally drove off, I followed at a distance. They didn't head back to our neighborhood or Mark's usual routes. Instead, they stopped at a nearby park. I watched as they climbed into his taxi, and my stomach churned when I realized what was happening. They were having sex in the car. I wanted to storm over there, to rip the door open and confront them, but I forced myself to stay put. This wasn't the time for a scene. I needed to keep my cool and think about my next move. When I got home, Sarah acted like everything was normal. She even kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day. I didn't say a word. I just smiled back, knowing I finally had the proof I needed. That night, as Sarah slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had the proof I needed, but now what? Confronting her again wouldn't accomplish anything, she'd just lie and twist the story like she always did. No, I needed a plan. Something more decisive. The next morning, I acted like everything was normal. I helped the kids get ready for school, made breakfast, and kissed Sarah goodbye as she left for work, probably another excuse to see Mark. As soon as she was out the door, I started making calls. First to a lawyer. I explained my situation, and the lawyer didn't mince words. "If you're thinking about divorce, having evidence of her infidelity will help. But be careful. Don't let her know what you're planning just yet." Next, I called a private investigator. I already had some proof, but I wanted more, something undeniable that Sarah couldn't wiggle out of. Over the next week, the investigator followed Sarah and Mark, gathering photos and video evidence of their rendezvous. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just meeting at motels, they were going on dates, acting like a couple in public while I was home with the kids. One night, the investigator called with an update. "She's not just seeing the taxi driver," he said, his voice hesitant. "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "She's been spending time with another man, a younger guy. From what I can tell, he's your son's football coach." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah wasn't just having an affair, she was juggling multiple affairs. I felt sick to my stomach, but at the same time, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. Sarah wasn't the person I thought she was, and she wasn't going to stop unless I put an end to it. But I wasn't going to confront her outright. Not yet. Instead, I started documenting everything. Every text message, every photo, every receipt. I made sure to keep backups in case she tried to destroy the evidence. At the same time, I started subtly distancing myself from her. I stopped initiating conversations, stopped trying to spend time with her. I focused on the kids, making sure they felt loved and supported, even as the tension between Sarah and me grew. She noticed, of course. One night, she asked, "Is everything okay? You've been distant." I forced a smile. "Just work stress," I said, keeping my tone light. "Nothing to worry about." She seemed satisfied with that answer and didn't press further. But deep down, I was already preparing for the storm to come. It all came to a head one evening, about a week after I'd confirmed Sarah's second affair. I'd been patient, gathering evidence and biding my time, but I couldn't take the charade anymore. I came home early from work, knowing Sarah wouldn't expect me. Sure enough, her car wasn't in the driveway. I checked the tracker on my phone. It showed her parked at a familiar motel. This time, I didn't wait outside. When I arrived, I walked straight to the front desk, flashed my ID, and calmly said, "My wife is here with another man. I need her room number." The clerk looked nervous but eventually relented after I showed him a photo of Sarah. "Room 214. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment, trying to steel myself for what I was about to see. And then I knocked. There was a pause, followed by hushed voices and the sound of hurried movement. Finally, Sarah opened the door, her face pale as she saw me standing there. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she stammered, trying to block my view of the room. I didn't answer. I pushed past her and found Mark sitting on the bed, shirtless and looking just as shocked as she was. The room smelled of sweat and cheap motel soap, and there was no mistaking what had just happened. For a moment, none of us spoke. The tension was suffocating. Finally, I broke the silence. "So this is what you've been doing," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Sneaking around, lying to me, to the kids?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice sharp. "Don't insult me by lying again." Mark tried to say something, but I turned to him with a look that made him shrink back. "You don't get to talk. Get dressed and get out." He hesitated, glancing at Sarah, but one look from me and he grabbed his clothes and bolted. When he was gone, I turned back to Sarah. She looked defiant, like she was ready to argue, but there was fear in her eyes too. "Jake, You're unbelievable," I interrupted. "Do you even realize what you've done? Or are you too selfish to care?" She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You're not perfect, Jake. You've been distant, cold. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened." Her words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let her manipulate me. "This isn't on me," I said firmly. "You made a choice, Sarah. And now you're going to deal with the consequences." I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there, stunned and silent. When I got home, I sat in the quiet of our living room, thinking about the life we'd built together and how easily she'd thrown it away. But I wasn't done. This wasn't just about ending our marriage, it was about making sure she couldn't keep hurting the people who loved her. After the motel confrontation, Sarah and I barely spoke. She tried to act normal around the kids, but there was an icy distance between us that even they began to notice. I didn't confront her anymore, I didn't need to. She knew the walls were closing in. But then something happened that sent me reeling all over again. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd taken Ethan to his football practice. He loved playing, and I enjoyed watching him on the field. It was one of the few bright spots in an otherwise dark time. While Ethan ran drills with his team, I stood on the sidelines with some of the other parents, making small talk. That's when I noticed Sarah. She wasn't supposed to be there. She'd said she had errands to run, but there she was, standing across the field, talking to Coach Ryan. At first, I thought it was just a casual conversation. But then I saw the way she touched his arm, the way she laughed a little too loudly at something he said. My stomach twisted into knots. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that I was just being paranoid after everything with Mark. But deep down, I knew better. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention. Sarah suddenly seemed very interested in Ethan's practices, even though she'd rarely come to them before. She volunteered to bring snacks for the team, stayed late to chat with Coach Ryan, and found excuses to visit the field even when Ethan wasn't playing. It didn't take long for me to confirm my suspicions. One afternoon, I followed her again. She'd told me she was meeting a friend for coffee, but instead, she drove to a park near the school. I parked a distance away and watched as Ryan pulled up beside her. They got out of their cars and walked to a secluded picnic table, talking and laughing. And then they kissed. I couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened with Mark, after all the lies and betrayals, she was already seeing someone else. That night, I confronted her again. "Ryan?" I said, my voice low but filled with anger. "You're sleeping with Ethan's coach now?" Her eyes widened for a split second, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms and giving me that same defiant look she'd used before. "You're insane," she said, shaking her head. "You're obsessed with finding something wrong with me. Maybe you should take a look in the mirror, Jake." I laughed bitterly. "You're unbelievable, Sarah. Do you really think I'm that stupid? I've seen you with him." Her mask cracked for just a moment, but then she composed herself and shrugged. "So what if I am? You've already made up your mind about me. Why should I care what you think?" Her words were like a punch to the gut, but this time, I didn't let them break me. "You should care," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Because this time, I'm done. I'm filing for divorce." Her smirk faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Good luck with that," she said, her voice venomous. "You think you can just walk away and take everything? You're not as smart as you think, Jake." I didn't respond. I just walked away, feeling a strange sense of relief. I was done trying to save her. Now, it was time to save myself and my kids. Thank you very much for watching. Please support me by subscribing with a like and of course write a comment. Thank you and see you in another video.